Kenya has allowed restaurants to reopen for business, but under stringent measures to contain the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. We now cross to our our correspondent there, Sarah Kimani, who's in Nairobi, to take us through what some of these measures are. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, Sarah. So the government is sort of easing things, but certainly not letting things bolt open. Tell us a little bit about what is being relaxed and what restrictions remain.
Well, initially what had been put in place was that restaurants could only do takeaways, so that has now been relaxed, and people can actually go into restaurants, sit down and have a meal. However, they're talking about the number of people at any given time in the restaurants being fewer than what restaurants would hold previously. They're also talking about issues of having clients sitting at least 1.5 meters apart from each other. Bars will remain closed, but restaurants can sell alcohol just before a meal and up to 30 minutes after a client has had a meal. Another of the things they're saying, which is probably going to be very controversial, is that all people who will be working in these restaurants that will be reopened have to be tested for COVID-19. Now, people asking how possible this will be, because Kenya is already saying that it does not have enough test kits, and also it is not clear yet who will take care of the cost. The cost of testing in a private facility for COVID-19 is about 18,000 Kenya shillings. That's about $180. So too much for many people working in restaurants to be able to handle, considering also that these restaurants have been closed for some time. So people will, of course, be wondering how this happens. Buffets, or what some people call buffets, will not be allowed. So all the meals that will be served, somebody must be seated down, and the meal will be brought to the table where they're seated.
So the restaurateurs and people that own these food outlets must be quite happy about these new measures.
Well, they're happy that restaurants will finally be open, because the last time we did an interview in Nairobi, the capital city here, what we noticed is that most restaurants had actually closed their doors completely, and those that were open were complaining that Kenyans are not used to takeaways, and so many people had actually shunned the whole business of eating or taking away their food, meaning most of them have had to either cut down on staff or close down completely. In one of the restaurants where we spoke, they'd actually said if one was willing to continue working, then they had to have their salary cut by up to 60%. So indeed they're happy, apart from the concerns of how then do they go about testing their staff members, and is there a certificate that will be issued so that once you reopen, then there will be no cases of harassment either by public health officials or by police.
All right, so these are restaurants. What does it mean for people perhaps who sell food on the side of the road?
Well, those have actually been operating under very tough conditions, because most of the times police have come and overturned their kiosks and their businesses. Some have been arrested, but they have been trying to survive in most of the cases, avoiding security. And in those areas, all the measures that have been put in government have been overlooked. We have seen people sitting to eat beans and chapati on the streets. We've seen them sitting to have their ugali close to each other. Most of these are the informal workers, people working in the construction sites. Sometimes they have been chased away, but sometimes I think government has looked the other way, because these are people who depend on this as their for their daily income.
So these interesting restrictions that have been imposed on restaurants, but I guess the challenge might be enforcing compliance. The authorities can't be in all these restaurants at the same time.
Exactly, and that's why when you look at some Kenyans on Twitter actually worried that although Kenya has managed to keep the numbers quite low at about 365 today, this reopening of restaurants might actually be the beginning of trouble for the country. Some worried that this is where the infections will rise from, and many saying that they will definitely be keeping off the restaurants.
Are there any voices that are worried that there's been this relaxation?
Yes, a lot of people are worried, but most of them are talking out on social media. We are yet to speak to health officials to know what they think, because people are asking, if you test the restaurant staff, you have not tested the clients who are coming into these restaurants, and is it possible that the restaurants will actually adhere to these social distancing measures? And once you test a person today, does it mean tomorrow they are still negative if you find them negative today? And people saying that Kenya is rushing, that this seems like they are now beginning to have a gradual reopening of the economy or the gradual reopening of businesses, while they should have waited a little longer so that the curve is completely flattened.
All right, so here in South Africa, there's been an easing to level 4 from level 5, but the minister was quite careful to say that, if the situation does not improve and people don't comply, that it could go back to tougher restrictions. Is that the same kind of message that's come from the authorities in Kenya, that if these restrictions don't get abided by, that they could go back to tighter restrictions?
Yes, indeed. President Kenyatta over the weekend announced that the dawn to dusk curfew, the national dawn to dusk curfew, would continue, and this time for 3 weeks, 20 days. Containment of people inside Nairobi, Kilifi County, at the coast of Kenya, Mombasa, at the coast of Kenya, Kwale, at the coast of Kenya, would continue. Another county called Mandera on the border with Ethiopia and Somalia would continue. But they're saying that if people will try to sneak out of Nairobi, or if people will be outside during the curfew, hesitate to make these measures stringent. What the Kenyan government has done, which is quite political, is that it has tried to avoid complete lockdown. The majority of Kenyans depend on a daily income, so they must wake up and go to, a garage.
All right. Sarah, we're going to have to leave it there. It's so bad. The line has just got so bad there, but we really got most of the story. So we're grateful for that update there from Nairobi. That's our correspondent, Sarah Kimani, telling us about the Kenyan government trying to ease the plight of particularly the restaurateurs and businesses involved in catering to make some of these businesses open and available to the public, and it will start with people being allowed to go into the restaurant, not just takeaways as had been originally mooted, and as we will be seeing here in South Africa from Friday.